This is the tale of the German prisoners of war, or POWs, who were confined in the United States, and specifically within the confines of special medical facilities, such as Camp Concordia in Kansas. This video is not of the punishment or forced labor, but of careful medical rehabilitation, more so in case of permanent disability. We will be contributing to the deeper psychological, ethical repercussions of this policy. How this American behavior, with its focus on dignity and the common humanity of a physical mend, was a peculiar silent triumph, breaking through the decades of ideological programming among the disabled lost enemy. The railroad came to a halt, and its deep breathing with steam whomped over the even hot Kansas prairie. A heavy metallic groan of brakes and couplers shook the platform, and the weeks of crowded, dizzying motion were over. And out of the dark, stuffy freight cars, there came men who used to be soldiers, but now they looked more like the victims of a natural catastrophe. Their uniforms, which had been sharp, were dirty, the collars untied, and all signs, all marks of both purpose and pride had been deprived of them. Others had crude field bandages on. Others were easy to recognize by limping along with their own homemade canes. Some had received such crippling blows that they could do nothing to assist themselves, but had to be lifted down by others as precarious as themselves. The emotional burden of the scene was enormous. These men had grown up on the harsh, implacid language of total war, and weakness and disability were regarded with the utmost cold contempt by the Nazi regime in particular. They had supposed as prisoners to receive the whole force of victor resentment, to be shouted at, mocked, ignored, or, at best, to have shown to them that cold, unemotional efficiency which treated them like liabilities. Sergeant Otto Voss, who had been at the Ardennes, held the railing and stood indecisively before trying to take a step up to the solid surface. In place of his right leg was a bandaged stump, which served to remind him all the time of the leg he had lost, to create a constant, dull throb that was the only remaining part of his leg. He had been all the way preparing himself to the expected enmity, to shout, to scorn, to enjoy the delight of the conqueror, to human behavior, as expected of a conquest. However, the words uttered by the first one to reach his ears were very low in tone, quiet, and entirely out of the ordinary. "Need a hand, fella?" Below, an American corporal was standing with his palms open in a casual attitude, and his expression was that of mere professional readiness. Voss gazed, and his reasoning could not adapt this non-aggressive attitude of the man to his uniform. He could not digest the question. Slowly the corporal repeated it, pointing to the ground. Then Voss just allowed the man to do his weight. Here the heat shocked him, when he had been weeks in the cool dampness of the Atlantic and the damp dampness of the prison camps in France. The Kansas air would smell like dust and hay, and the sweetness of ripening wheat nearly as sweet as home. This odor was so rustic compared with this odor of cordite and disinfectant which had been the atmosphere of his existence. Farther off, on the other side of the immediate railway platform, stood a row of olive-drab trucks in a well-organized line with broad white crosses drawn on. Orderlies in the immediate processing area were moving fast, effectively, and most importantly, quietly. The prisoners were welcomed to stretchers and benches with calm voices, in which they waved them and called out in simple orders, "Next, mind your step." We'll get you settled." There was an exchange of glances of suspicion between the German prisoners. They were trained that resources were limited, that charity was of a weak kind, and that an enemy only had what was needed to keep him useful. Why should valuable medical materials, clean linen and manpower be spent on the enemy wounded? Voss was to be moved into the corral like cows, screamed at, and soon become an unnamed figure in a book. Rather, he was summoned by a young medical lieutenant who took pains to write his name, Otto Voss, on a clipboard. The lieutenant looked him in the face and talked through an experienced translator. "There is nothing to worry about, rank or unit," said he. "All we have to do is know how to assist you. The first thing here is to put all the men back on their feet." Voss nodded, and his throat was too constricted to give answer, the mere words sticking in his head as a gesture of immeasurable and indescribable generosity. The procession continued on, the dust swirling in copper-red trails behind the tires. The buildings of Camp Concordia appeared at the horizon, an U.S. Army's medical department camp that was created with the express purpose of rehabilitating POWs. The guard towers were unexpectedly not very impressive, not so much in the nature of fortified buildings, but rather of silos or water tanks. They crossed through the gate to find a guard, a tall, wearied-looking man, saluting. He made a point of doing it because it was a routine of the military. No Germans that arrived were reciprocating the act. They knew not whether they were permitted or it would be mistaken and would be equated to insolence. Within the compound, there were ranks of nurses in starched khaki skirts, medics and orderlies with waiting wheelchairs. A German prisoner beside Voss said, scarcely audible, "They get cripples ready as though they were their own children." It was scoundrelly thought, even to himself, but it was true nonetheless. Within the great ward, first, there was a beam of sunlight which broke through bleached curtains to form beams of warm light on the polished wood floor. Fresh milk was poured into glasses, and clean folded sheets and heavy wool blankets were on every table. The overpowering scent was not the odor of fear, dirty flesh, or aging powder. To men who had made their journey out of the rubble of Normandy and had traveled to stockades in France and across the Atlantic, such stillness seemed impossible, as to enter into a peace that was artificial and that was of other, better worlds. The first and most lasting kinds of moral shock were the mere cleanliness and the plenty of them. Camp Concordia soon got into a schedule which was not disorderly, but not very severe. Just after dawn, the bugle aroused the guards and prisoners. Breakfast was a plentiful affair. Powdered eggs seasoned and coated by the jam, and coffee in thick slices of bread. To the able-bodied, work consisted in helping the local farmers to harvest their crops, something they needed to know as a result of being captured. But with permanently disabled, the day was focused on rehabilitation and responsibilities according to their injuries. A man who has lost his hand may be the mail sorter of the whole camp. A man who has lost one eye may manage the library, taking great care of the little store of books which is donated and seized as spoil. These responsibilities were not disciplinary. They were to inculcate routine and a sense of purpose. The food, most especially, was a silent protest to the ideology they had received an education on. It was not fancy, but it was uniform, bountiful, and comparable to the rations of the American Guards. This material security, the very fact that they were fed and clean, was a precondition of the subsequent psychological change. The most striking and subject mattered place in the whole camp was the prosthetic workshop. It was at this place that the mystic of their position was condensed. German POWs, carpentry specialists, former engineers, and even the amputees themselves constituted half the workforce, and they were learning to make their own replacements. The other half were technicians and mechanics of American Army. Band saws whistled a monotonous melody, files whistled on untamed wood, and the rapping of hammers working on sheet metal gave a continual accompaniment. Artificial limbs in the 1940s were not mass-produced, but were expensive, specialized tools and made in small batches. Scrap aircraft aluminium, the byproducts of the air war, was used as pivots in a leg, made up of knee joints. The soles of artificial feet were produced out of thick and discarded rubber tires. Technicians were examining the stump and the limbs, and this was done with patience, which was tiring. When a good squeaked or rubbed, or when the leather straps or wooden socket were moved, and they laughed and began afresh. This was the common work where the most radicalizing de-radicalization happened. What absurdity had befallen each new arrival? The foe who had dropped bombs on the manufactories in Germany was now with his own rejected stuff industriously restoring the mobility of man. The dissonance was described in letters by prisoners that were censored and passed on frequently. One of them wrote that the American was told victory comes only through machines and efficiency. Their machines are here of service to compassion. Their human approach is their most efficient one. It was a place of the fine, meticulous work during the workshop. The Otto Voss new leg process was normal and demanded a lot of cooperation. The initial one was to make a plaster of Paris cast of the residual limb of Voss. This stage was under the care of Earl Stevens, a black-haired American machinist who lost 3 fingers to shrapnel in Bastogne. The socket was the most important element. In case of the improper fit, the prisoner could never walk painlessly. Second was pylon and joint assembly. The pylon or main shaft was usually made of laminated wood, powerful, lightweight, and hardy. The joints were complicated, especially in the case of amputation above the knee, like in the case of Voss. They used recycled aluminum used in the crashed or scrapped aircrafts. Very delicate was the work of filing and assembling the knee joint, which is a set of bearings, bolts, and locking mechanisms. Voss was a pre-war mechanic who was sucked into technicality. And third, gait training and iteration. When the leg was assembled, the real work commenced. Walking. Voss had to rediscover balance, weight distribution, and momentum. It was a painful, frustrating, and exhausting work. But the Americans never gave him an opportunity to quit. When he went over, Stevens would get him on his feet, not out of pity, but out of challenge. Again, Otto, longer stride, strong in the heel, strong, he would say. Stevens himself was a disabled person with a partial hand and could relate to both the physical and mental strain. This respect of one another as professionals, as men of business, gradually, almost unnoticed, wore the national and ideological frontiers. The humanitarian treatment failed at the fence line. On the open Kansas fields out of camp, local people frequently saw the former German soldiers in the process of harvesting wheat or bale hay next to their own sons and the hired hands. They saw the amputees riding tractors upon which the prosthetic artificial limbs held the lever, with the steadiness of flesh, which was a credit to the art of the Concordia workshop. The deepest encounters were those between the farmers who required additional labor and invited the working POWs to supper. When he was in a fit to move about, Otto Voss was now and then with them. He also remembers a night in the Peterson farm. Here was a feast of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and sweet corn. There was an air of silence, sat thick and heavy with the silence of the past and the shame of the broken English-German, which just made it across the gap. Mrs. Peterson, the kind Scottish-looking lady, with her weary brown hands, laid a big ladle of gravy beside the plate of Voss. Her son was in combat in the Pacific. She was gazing at the leg of Voss, not with criticism, but with a pure, common human pity. "Eat," she said, her voice rough. "You need your strength." Voss understood that the hospitality did not require any translation. They were having the same diet, they were on the same space, they were looking at the same harvest moon. This was a mere gesture of sharing, of being aware of the hunger of a man beneath his uniform. And this had shaken years of conditioning more violently than any sermon or political speech. It also showed them, without saying, that cruelty was not something they needed to go through in war, but rather a choice. The rumors which had been spread in the local papers regarding the high-quality hospital treatment given to the prisoners on taxpayer money were treated by the camp administration in a strictly principled and blunt way. America fights cruelty by not trying to appease it. As soldiers, we treat wounded soldiers. To make the incongruity complete, American veterans who had just regained the ability to walk after what they had experienced in North Africa or Italy frequently came to visit the camp, not as a guard or as an inspector, but to bring donated supplies or to impart trade skills such as carpentry. They were welcoming to the Germans without any ill will, and at times exchanged jokes or stories about exasperating bureaucracy in the military through translators. These American veterans were analyzed by the Germans as an eyewitness, testimony on how a society behaved toward its wounded champions. In Nazi Germany, the lame were pushed aside and perceived as a burden on the fit, a distraction of the ideal image of Aryans. In this case, wheelchairs were pushed down the main street on holidays with flags tied to the handles. Years of ideological training was shaken by the public. Obvious celebration of the maimed soldier, no matter on which side he was battling. The cuts were identical. Only the uniform and the reaction of the society towards it were new. It was winter, and the Kansas plains were hard frozen in a vast, cold sky. Within the camp, the morning bell was ringing with white breath, and the metronomy of crutches and new artificial limbs with packed snow. The prosthetic shop work went on inexorably, with the metal being heated in the coal stoves, rubber with its odor of oil and sweat. Sergeant Voss was used to the beat of betterment. There were small successes each week. An alignment brace was adjusted more correctly. The leather cuff fitted more snugly. He managed to take 3 steps without needing to use his hands. He and Earl Stevens had worked out a silent, perfunctory communication between the bandsaw and the lathe. One afternoon, Voss was trying a difficult exercise, which was walking backwards with a small load. He was able to make 3 perfect, precise strides, and the new prostitution must have slipped into position like a clockwork. Stevens, who was not fond of giving judgments, applauded once with a stinging burst. "That is enough, friend," I said. But now I am going to wait for the translator to come. There goes the war ending. It's sound here. Voss did not require the translation. The clicking of the knee joint was the note of a restoration to function, of his own possibility once more created. More powerful than any victory parade was it a sound. The material reparation brought about a moral recompense. He was being restored to life by the people who had taken it away in arms conflict. This made it difficult to have any residual ideological hatred or obligation. In early spring, when the examination staff came, Colonel Harris, a veteran surgeon in charge of the medical department, requested that they provide volunteers to show how their gaits are going to be improved. Voss stepped forward. He stepped out of the room with easy tread men, with his head erect. Once they had passed the room, Harris tapped him on the shoulder. "Gentlemen," he said to the observed staff and prisoners, "these men are prepared to go whole back to life." The statement, falling on the eyes of the German prisoners who were watching it, fell not as a medical opinion, but as a great revelation over the worth of their own lives. With the spring warming up the camp, life within the fence started to ring with normal civilian labor. Trust became an ordinary action, a requirement, and not an outrage. The men who had come ashore and had come to believe in their own insignificance came back to life, healed, functional, and deeply divided when the repatriation orders at last came. They both got a medical discharge, a brand new, high-tech prosthetic, and 2 packs of cigarettes, American. The prosthetic was probably the most treasured thing that a defeated soldier might take home. The last eventful night before the departure was silent and thoughtful. Guards and prisoners crowded around the fence, exchanging little significant objects, carved birds, crudely painted pocket knives, small scribbled letters. Earl Stevens drew Voss aside. He gave him a little battered wrench, and the handle of it was marked with his initials. E.S. for bending loose bolts, he said. His hand hesitated. Even good legs should be maintained. It was a repairing instrument, a metaphor that was provided by one crippled man to another. Convoy was this time again formed the next morning. No one spoke, and the whiteness of the sunlight blazing on the fence wire, the clang of the boots on the ramps, and the motors whipping into action like heartbeats, giving new life to the world. The quietness of the departure was greater than that of their arrival. In his homeland, the rubbled Germany, after the war, Otto Voss was employed in a cooperative which repaired machinery. He had a wrench of the Americans tied about his belt to remind him, and the former comrades or the doubtful neighbors who might ask why he retained as a souvenir one of the gifts of the enemy had a ready answer, which was formed by the experience of Camp Concordia, that it was to remind them that the enemy believed more in progress than in punishment. It was not only in the field that they had triumphed, but at the bench. Today, only a few foundations of Camp Concordia remain, barely visible under the relentless Kansas sun. But under that soil lingers the blueprint of a peculiar moral victory, the victory of conduct over cruelty, of maintenance over malice. In that Midwestern camp, men who expected humiliation discovered dignity instead. They learned that where strength can still offer care, defeat begins to heal itself. Humanity's quiet triumph is not the right to conquer, but the courage to mend, and sometimes, between the hands that splint a stranger's wound, the real peace begins before the war has even officially ended. Thanks for watching. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to more amazing history stories.